got your water? You good to?
I think I'm good without water for now.
You're good without water. Okay,
Yeah.
very good.
Had a bunch of Pringles, so I'm good.
Good. Well,
All right. Are we ready to go?
I'm curious about the cigar stick.
Welcome back to Brothers of the Arcana. My name is Alex Aldea.
This is Dave Ferrigno. Welcome to episode 2. We're
Episode 2.
joined with our brother Nestor Ramirez.
Howdy. Thank you for having me.
Not a conjoined brother, but we are joined by him. That was a bad joke, sorry. Okay. Nestor will be talking about... What are we talking about today, Nestor?
I mean, we can talk about a lot of things, but I think earlier we were kind of chatting about psychedelics and how it could probably be a good thing to discuss openly. Benefits, not so good benefits.
Absolutely. Psychedelics, entheogens, and we'll get into what the differences may or may not be there between those two things. Our cigar of the day, because Nestor was interested, is the Fat Bottom Betty by Drew Estate. And they're very cool. They do a sort of the Sugar Skulls type of tattoo type of thing. West Coast, kind of cool. This is my favorite of the bunch. They have the Crazy Alice and the leather.
Leather, wood, and there's a bunch of others.
What he said.
Drew Estate has plenty of cigars. But anyways, we digress.
So we won't be smoking them today because this podcast studio is smoke-free.
This one.
However... this will be our thing. And we forgot the bourbon. So we're firing on all cylinders today.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
This is what happens when we film during the afternoon.
Absolutely. But, I hope our viewers will forgive us. It's our second podcast, so we're trying. But we're excited to have you. Thank you so much for being a part of it.
Thank you for allowing me to be here and have these conversations, which I think are good. They're good to have in any form and with anyone, to be candid.
Absolutely. And just starting from the top, Nestor, so for a layman that's not familiar, if you're talking about a medicine journey or getting into these psychedelics, how would you describe it? What would you tell somebody that has no knowledge whatsoever of it?
Right. It's tricky because if they have no knowledge of it, it's almost like, where do you even begin? And I think for the most part, people who are aware of it to some degree are on the path to getting it or to getting there, right? So it's like, perfect example is if I'm in the grind and then I have my 9 to 5 and I have 3 kids and they have school and I'm going through the motions of providing for my family, I'm not going to proactively or actively know what these things are or if they're available, right? My normal protocol for seeking help is to go into my primary doctor, right? And then from there I get prescribed, maybe you should speak to this person, maybe you should speak to that person. So I think nowadays, because of how open it's been, some people might have someone who knows of someone who did some sort of spiritual journey and they're ranting and raving over things that they've been able to achieve since, or an understanding of how they can be better, can be enticing. So for the layman's, it's really, I would say, a path that people take because the conventional methods of healing are not working, or are not progressing in the fashion that one would think or expect. And it's tricky because for the last, I don't know how many years since the 70s or 80s, where it became classified, even cannabis, for instance, cannabis is a psychedelic. It's, people think it's a narcotic. It's not. It's funny to say. A lot of people say, well, if it's a psychedelic, then it's generally the gateway drug. Like if you have cannabis, it's like the lower lesser of all the psychedelic substances that are out there. So anyway, with marijuana being decriminalized, shows on Amazon, Netflix, documentaries being out there, people are now understanding that there's this other avenue of addressing whether they're personality disorders, post-traumatic stress disorders, or things that the conventional healing methods aren't working. So anyway, so if I tell somebody, what is it you're talking about? Drugs? I'm not about drugs. It's you're already taking drugs because the pharmacology provides you prescriptions to address certain chemical imbalances. Let's say depression, for instance. You're going to be getting an SSRI or a monoamine oxide inhibitor, an MAOI. These two components are essentially playing with your psyche, so to speak. Like you're already tripping if you're on an SSRI or a monoamine oxide inhibitor, right? It's regulating your serotonin levels from your gut to your brain.
Interesting.
So the shamans figured out that there were these other substances that would take that are kind of extreme because they do tackle the ego, and you do have this like dissolution of who you think you are as a person and your identity, and so there's an identity crisis. And it's a world that's hasn't been studied sufficiently, so you could be susceptible to bad players, bad actors, so to speak. But what helped me kind of navigate that space when I got curious and I started asking questions and searching for it was credible organizations doing scientific research. Maps.org is one of them. So for the layman's who hear these things about spirit journeys, I would say to go to maps.org, where you'll have a lot of scientific papers. They'll have things for layman's, things who are into, for anybody. If you want to know the chemical component, why is this happening, or the spiritual aspect, or different uses or things that they've already been used to cure or to manage, that would be the place to go. So I don't know. I'm not sure if that answered the question how I would go to approaching someone who doesn't know about it, because I'm a very, very avid believer that if you know it, it's because you've already started walking through that path. It's something that you have to ask and search for. It's not something that would ultimately land on your lap unless we were in that civilization, which would incorporate it, right? Or maybe,
So, just breaking it down a little bit, the gateway created by this gateway drug is actually a really cool, interesting idea in the best way possible. Pot, marijuana, cannabis, whatever you want to call it, oftentimes is something that is done as a catalyst moving from one experience to the other. So it actually smooths the transition into a trip and out of a trip.
Yeah.
Oftentimes. A lot of shaman will use it for that purpose. So in a sense, yes, of course it's a gateway drug because it actually brings you into the other space. So there's two spaces, right, as we talk about this. So could you talk a little bit more about the idea of what this space is that we're in now and what the space that gets created when you're not here, when you're on the journey, so to speak?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, I think it's like the outward or the inward, right? So for me, the only way that I can try to explain it is if I'm having an intense psychedelic experience, your body is inundated with input. So all your brain neurons supposedly are connected, and there is a study in the maps.org that shows your brain lit up before and after these experiences. You have people mention, and I've had it, where sound becomes smell, smell becomes sound. It's your body just being over-flooded with input.
Synesthesia, they call that. Yeah.
So for me, what ended up happening was the outside was too much, so I went inward. And it's almost as though it's like a virtual reality place, so to speak, that is governed by symbolism and geometric shapes. That by just seeing them or experiencing them, you obtain some sort of understanding, which is perplexing. So like that's where I would separate the spaces. There's the external, and then there's the internal, the exoteric or the esoteric worlds. And then from there, it can get kind of like interesting depending on what ideology or narrative you take with whatever ancient school or practice, or like a shaman would describe that to be the spirit world. I'm saying it as an inward world. Yeah, I think it's hard. I would say it's inward and external and internal for me. Those are the two spaces that.
So when you say narrative, you mean story somebody has about what they're experiencing, right? So,
yeah. Like, so the only thing that I can say is what I've experienced with whatever I did to experience things. So, like, if I went to a movie, I can tell you my perspective of the experience of the movie theater, who I was, what I was wearing. Like, that's all the external, right? But I could also share with you everything that the movie made me feel, how it moved me, and how I this scene, triggered this thought of my past, or this scene triggered a wish or a desire. So now I'm connecting with the movie. So that's kind of how I would say the external and the internal, and it's all based on a perspective, and that's the narrative. So the narrative is, if I go study shamanism, I'd have to go and read books about shamanism. They are painting a picture of what that world looks like. I'm accepting and adopting what those narratives are, and then find my way to attaching to that narrative or creating one that is your own with the mixture of these other narratives, so to speak. So like the story that we tell each other or tell ourselves, or we openly accept from another.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel you can deconstruct your own ego when you're on these trips, and from a spiritual journey and from that inward journey, what would you say would be most beneficial to the majority of individuals? And I think it would probably also depend on what type of journey they're on.
Yeah, I think the idea of deconstructing the ego is calling for many. I don't know if that's what it does. It identifies the ego, because it's almost as though as soon as you have the experience where things in the outside world are a little bit different, and then they go from different to now they're morphing into something that shouldn't be happening. When you have that, you immediately think that you've made the biggest mistake of your life, and now you're going to die. You've convinced yourself that you've blew it, you've read the wrong things, you did what you shouldn't have done, and then there's all that other baggage that comes with the taboo of what you've done, or what you've been chasing after, what you're looking to do. That you identify your ego in a very interesting manner, and almost as though you have to let go of who you are, because you're no longer there. That experience has brought you inward, and you're seeing things that you cannot articulate, you've never seen before, or if you have, it's dreamy, and it's like maybe you interpreting it as me as a child or a memory. Like it's so complex that you do have to kind of let go and say, okay, well, this is who I was. However, I've had moments where I've come back, and that ego that just exhaled now takes a deep inhale. And it's over present, and it's like now it's ruling, and I saw this, so I know this, and then you know what? I think I'm God, and I'm here to save the world, and then so that there's this big inhale and exhale of what we call the ego, which, if you ask me, the ego we shouldn't wish to have the ego dissolved, and I really pin on the idea of how the shamans use this ceremony or this medicine for those who've had issues with integrating with their culture or with the tribe, and it's putting the ego to use. Ego's not toxic. Ego's there for survival, right? We don't have to survive anymore. Right. No one survives. Everyone's thriving. Whether you're in an unfortunate circumstance of not having employment or not having a particular salary, we're not chasing animal to feed, and we're not hiding on the trees for shelter, right? So the ego has lost its use type of
Although
thing.
my friend almost got eaten by a jaguar.
Yeah, I heard that.
The trials and tribulations of being training with a shaman in the Amazon is you may get eaten by a jaguar.
Yeah, but self-inflicted. Yeah.
Yes.
So what happens there is there's an honest discourse with yourself, and identifying that there is a narrative you've chosen to identify yourself with, and that narrative is an ego, but you can determine what that narrative is in any moment in time. And because you had the experience of witnessing physical reality dissolve and it no longer exist, and you be in a place that is so filled with geometric shapes, and it's giving you the feeling of unity. You're uniting with something, the source. It's very profound. Mm-hmm. Most people say it's like amongst the most life-changing experience next to having a child. And they're probably saying that, not admitting that the first one is actually more impacting than the latter. Like, I've had a child and I've had the trip. They both impacted my life greatly, but I'm really happy I took the trip before I had the child.
Okay.
Interesting. How do you feel like that changed for you, or what changed for you vis-a-vis having the child post-trip?
The idea of grounding in a circumstance, in a scenario, and being open to what is happening without the necessary knee-jerk reaction to react. I didn't have that until I went to that space and everything dissolved and I had no choice but to not react. Almost like I fell asleep or I fainted. So, and then throughout that whole journey, I had all these little bits and pieces of like gems, so to speak, that were explained to me with geometric shapes. Like, it's hard to explain. And all that came like narrative, the idea of being able to, you deciding what you want, changing the narrative that you have, and that the best action is inaction. Like, those were really heavy when I came down of my really first like mind-bending experience where I took an overdose of a substance, and I just took off. But yeah, so the ego's got a use. We misuse it because we don't have to survive, so we cling on to things and narratives, and everything is mine because I'm experiencing it. And this will allow you to face that, understand it, and make better use of your ego.
So you made reference before that when you were on that trip, you feel like you're going to die.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, maybe it depends on the type of substance you're taking, but would you set yourself up where you're putting yourself into almost a spiritual protection or some kind of safe environment?
Oh, yeah. So
would you seek somebody to actually lead you through that first, from that experience? Maybe if it was, say, ayahuasca, maybe it's, mushrooms or whatever else.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like, so one of the things that I did before I started identifying that I wanted to have this experience is I read and listened to a bunch of stuff. Terrence McKenna is one of the individuals that I watch a lot of videos and heard his lectures. And a lot of the psychonauts, so to speak, or in the community, they talk a lot about setting. Like, they're set and you're setting. Like, so how do you feel even? Where are you going to do it? Are you going to be interrupted? Is the person who interrupts you going to understand that you're now in the influence of a substance? So the idea of being comfortable where you can genuinely just be present and experience the experience as it's unfolding is very important. So guided ones, maps.org, which I mentioned before, they have a non-profit organization that conducts ayahuasca ceremonies. I think it's in Washington. And,
DC or state of?
State of.
Uh-huh.
And so that's like an avenue where you can go, and they train sitters with breathing techniques and let you assist other people who are having bad experiences. Or you would have like a sitter. So if some people aren't going to be comfortable in an area where they're sharing space with other 30 people, even though there is a person assigned to you. It's just too many people. Your ego is your ego, and you're not going to be able to let go. Not me anyway.
Sure.
If I'm sharing a room with a lot of people, it's going to be people you don't know. They're going to have experiences. Sometimes they're visceral experience. So when people ask me, I'm interested in doing something like ancestral, some sort of medicine, what's the best way to do it? I go, well, where are you from? What's your lineage? Like, are you a Scandinavian? Because you shouldn't be going to Latin America. Maybe you should be going to where your ancestors come from. And then once you start digging deep in your ancestry, you realize every culture has had a witch doctor, a shaman, or a medicine that they would use for various purposes. And guided, obviously, and I would say guided in a sense where you are with someone who has done it before, because when you come back and you have questions, you need grounding. And I think that's why the CIA ended up having the mind control, MK Ultra, because
the MK Ultra.
You're very susceptible to a lot of stuff. You're turned on, you're open, you have a life-changing experience. Anybody who comes and whispers to your ear, you'd probably be more receptive than before. But guided in a sense where someone has had similar experiences and can say, well, these are my people that I trust, organizations that I've researched. And then obviously you'd have to go down that path yourself to decide. I did it by myself. I remember being home. I remember my at the time wife and son were out at a family trip. They were going to be done for the weekend. I was doing a lot of business traveling, so I had to quickly get my suit cleaned, and then get back on the plane type of thing. And I had 3 days. And everybody thought I was traveling. I didn't tell anyone. I stayed home. I set up my area, and I took my dose, and I was in complete darkness, like Terrence McKenna. You take a heroic dose in complete darkness and sit there and contemplate and just think about...
This was your first trip you took a heroic dose?
Yeah.
All right, folks, this is not for the faint of heart. I feel the need to really say that at this point, even though I'm sure we're going to put a thing at the beginning of this tape as well. But it's Nestor likes to jump in the deep part of the pool. So that's just something I think that, number one, you should have a sitter. Number two, don't necessarily start with a heroic dose. But go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right. So if you do it psychotherapy, if you're going to Johns Hopkins, you have several sessions with a psychotherapist, and then you have a low dose, and then you have a medium dose, and you're slowly introduced into that space for you to do guided work. So yeah, hands down. And you shouldn't do that because there's also the thin line of your psychosis. Like, you can lose your mind, so to speak, because of the experience. And if you're susceptible to, let's say, schizophrenia or other mental disorders, they could flare it up. It's all chemical imbalances, you know? So good call.
So one of the interesting things, there's this book on LSD, and I'll put it in the links. I forget exactly the name of the book. But the guy goes through about something like 80 to 120 different trips. While he's married, he gets divorced, then he's on his own, a bunch of other stuff happens. But one of the interesting things he says is, heroic doses may not be for the purpose that we think they are. We don't necessarily... Now, okay, let's break down what is a microdose, what is a regular dose, what is a heroic dose. If we're talking about psilocybin, a microdose can be 0.3% of a gram, right? So 0.1 to 0.3% of a gram. A regular dose would be 3 grams, and a heroic dose would be 5 grams and up, right? So that just as far as just for people to understand measurements and how these things sort of go. A heroic dose is a giant dose, so anything above 5 grams, so it could be 10 grams or whatever. I'm not advocating any of that, but just in terms of what it is. What the guy said, now he was doing it with LSD, not with psilocybin, not with magic mushrooms, as they are called. But for that heroic dose, he felt like what he was tackling there was not his personal stuff anymore. When you go into that realm where you're so completely disassociated, right, because of the amount of stuff that you're taking, he was actually at that point tackling ancestral things, familial lineage things, worldwide problems that he was then starting to eat at with metabolize, so to speak, because of the level. So he'd gotten outside of the realm of the things tackled by the ego. He is now slipping into worldwide things, right? So do you have any notion of that? That was his thought on it anyway. What was your experience with a microdose, a regular dose, and then a heroic dose, even though you started with heroic?
Yeah. Well, part of the reason why I felt like I needed to go deep in there is because I had already a history of cannabis consumption for a long time. And I was aware of the relationship between cannabis and like psychedelics. And in this particular heroic dose was psilocybin mushrooms. But to answer your question about the different layers, like the microdosing, I mean, it's I would equivalent a microdose to you more like a feeling, an uplifting feeling, so to speak. What I would describe it, and you have to excuse me because I tend to look at things almost like through a depression lens. So what I would describe a microdose of 0.3% of a percentage of a gram, it's almost like you waking up in a farm on vacation on a sunny day, blue sky. It's almost refreshing juice in a buffet. Like, today's going to be a good day kind of feeling, right? Once you go, let's say, to the 2 to 3 gram, there's a noticeable change in the environment. You can't point what's different, but you know something's different. You feel something different. Something's almost like you're in a level of anticipation is constantly lingering, which heightens your attention, and it explains why some tribes will use this type of dosing before they go to war or hunting. You know, their hearing is they're more like, I don't want to say paranoid because it gives a bad note, but you're enhanced. You're more in tune because you feel that something's different, and because of that, you have a higher propensity of trying to identify noises or what's going on. You're looking, you're identifying, and then the bigger doses, like I said, you have the people who enjoy the experience. And when everything's revolving in itself and kaleidoscoping, they want to be there. And then there's people like me, when all that stuff's happening, I got to shut down and go inward. And then when I have those inward experiences, a thought, a memory, a feeling could ignite inner work. Now, to answer to what you were saying about getting into a space where it's like you're working for the world or for a group of people or whatever, I can say I had a moment of an experience where this was with dimethyltryptamine,
which is the active ingredient in
ayahuasca.
Yeah. So we can jump into that, but I'd like to. Could we stick with mushrooms for a second,
sure.
and just go through that trip, and then we'll switch gears and go into the other stuff, because I'd like the viewers to understand what this is, what that is, and get a different sense of the qualities and everything of it, because they are different, right? So
I'd also like to ask
for our beginner here,
yes, as somebody that's never delved into any of this, I'm a newbie, obviously, and haven't even tried anything in my life.
Sure.
Probably shouldn't admit that on a podcast, but whatever.
Totally. It's all right. He does drink, but it's like this.
Yes, exactly. Pinky up, of course. When you mention geography and, to your point, like the ancestry of lineage, would you suggest then, as an example, I would imagine mushrooms were probably more readily available over in Europe as opposed to, maybe Latin America or whatever else. So you really should be focusing, what if somebody's a mutt and they came from, 5 or 6 different countries? Like, in that case, would you say they could kind of delve into anything, or?
If you're a mutt, if you want to use that term, let's say a typical American might have different ancestries, right? So at that point is how many generations are you in that particular culture that you're in now? And you go there, right? So if you're an American, you're here, and you got lineage from all over the world, then you start here, which would be the Native American medicines.
So that's mezcal, peyote.
Peyote, mezcal. Mushrooms is also American. Psilocybin, Amanita muscaria, if you go north, that's the fly agaric, the Mario Nintendo mushroom, the red one with white dots. But that's also Scandinavian. And so I would say that. So if you're interested and you're looking for the spiritual experiences and you don't have a particular understanding of where your ancestry comes from, then where have the last couple of generations been growing up? What jar are you from? You're in this jar. Okay, well, then you're from that makeup. What are some of the ancient practices of ancestors of that area? And then that's where you go. That's where you would have genuine access to an expert, a guide, and the right thing, not just some person in the street saying it's something and you not being able to verify it.
So I don't know. I think I may, on some level, agree with that and on some level disagree with it. Because when you go to Grandma's house, as they call an ayahuasca experience, everybody's welcome at Grandma's house, whether you're a Peruvian or whether you're a Scandinavian or whether you're Russian or African or whatever it is. It's an interesting thing because I think, so 2 things there. Number 1, it's a welcoming thing and it's the trip. And number 2, it's customizable. So on some level, it will begin, even if you're on an ayahuasca trip, it could double as a psilocybin trip, or it could double as a different type of trip, depending on what you need to see and what you're asking for, right? So that's something that I don't know if you've had experience with per se, but if you want to talk about that, that would be interesting.
Yeah. I think what ends up happening is, again, I was answering your question about what would be right, and you would land on you researching and finding this avenue, finding that modality, and then just the act of you researching would lead you down to eventually wanting to have the ayahuasca trip. The ayahuasca grandmother or mother, and the mushroom would be the father or grandfather, but Mescalitos also mixed there as a paternal energy too, from what I've heard.
I always thought Salvia divinorum was the father to ayahuasca.
I thought Salvia was a feminine energy.
That's interesting. Interesting because I've always heard it as like the ayahuasca is like the softer ride, and Salvia is like the grab you by the throat. I'm going to show you what you need to see kind of thing.
Yeah.
So interesting though.
Yeah, but I've never had a Salvia I never had a Salvia experience. So I don't know that. My experiences, just to be clear, have been DMT, ayahuasca, several different types of psilocybin mushrooms, synthetic psilocin. I think that's it. Oh, LSD, of course. It's almost like a staple once you go in that place, in that realm. There's that LSD component that shows up regularly. I think that's it.
So we've talked about psilocybin to some extent. LSD being the one other than psilocin, which I don't know much about, and I'm happy to hear about that, is man-made. It was invented by Frederick Hoffman, I believe. Hoffman, definitely the right name. I may be wrong on the first name. He was a chemist who was working with the ergot mushroom, or the not really mushroom, but the ergot fungus. And that's where it gets to some of the things like what they were talking about, the immortality key by my paisan Brian Murarescu, he's a Romanian guy from Canada, and he was he did a lot of research on the early Christians and how, to some extent, their Eucharist might have been psychedelic because it was bread, but it was bread used from some bread tainted with the ergot mushroom, which can fester in improperly stored grain, and how that then proceeded on some level to have a mystical experience and to see God, literally. And by eating the blood, drinking the blood and eating the body of God, of Christ, right? So that's what Christ talked about to some extent. So could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, that's loaded. John Allegro wrote the book, talks about how, and I think Brian alludes to this, that John Allegro is a linguist, so he was kind of breaking down the contents of what was being said in the Dead Sea Scrolls, because he was able to read them directly, and he believed that the Christianity was a cult that would consume mushrooms in a necromancy sort of way, to speak to the dead or to raise the dead. And that explains the caves in Ethiopia where there are paintings of Christ, because it was the 12 Apostles. I think a lot of Christian paintings in caves in Ethiopia, because it was done underground. Anybody caught practicing Christianity would be murdered, so to speak. And then there's stainless glass in several cathedrals in ancient Europe. I'm drawing a blank on where the stained glass is literally Jesus as a animated muscaria mushroom, and through Jesus you find God. And when I started researching the idea of me entertaining mushrooms, it all led that way. Every literature that I would read would kind of inch me into, okay, so the mushrooms is mana. Every reference in ancient literature, it was always with this, either some fermentation that preceded a fungus and it was drank, or it was a fungus that was cultured and grown on wood or on different type of material sources.
We got to ask Tim Hogan about that. If mushrooms are mana, then that might be an interesting question to ask.
Yeah. Well, I think for the alchemical, he talked about this himself, about his mana being the extraction of, for his, when you hear Tim Hogan, he talks about mana and how to extract it through alchemical transmutations. That same process is the process you use to extract the DMT from the root bark of the plant. So DMT is the mana, the life of that plant.
So not that I would know this, but hypothetically speaking, if you ever extracted DMT, you would potentially use something like food-grade lye and naphtha, which would crystallize into the DMT crystals, apparently.
Yeah.
That's my understanding.
Yeah, there's a bunch of tech on the internet. It's
I don't
great.
know anything about that stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Arrowwood.org. Arrowwood.org.
Arrowwood.org.
Yeah, arrowwood.org.
Do your own research, obviously, and come to your own conclusions. But back to LSD. So LSD is derived from the ergot mushroom, and then it's chemically made into lysergic acid.
Yeah.
And what makes LSD different from a mushroom trip? So we've talked about a mushroom trip to some extent. It's a natural, really dung mushrooms, right? At least a lot of them are grown in dung patties, cow patties, and such, right? So how does the LSD trip differ?
So the LSD is very head-driven, and you have a sense of control where you can dictate or navigate the space. The mushroom, there's always a moment where you have to kind of like engage the experience, and there's a lesson or chores that come or given to you, like, I have to do this and this when I'm done with this. There's some sort of like that piece. And then with ayahuasca, it's very maternal and nurturing, and almost like it's feeding you knowledge, but through a bottle. Father is, reprimanding you for what you did. And then the LSD is almost you as an adult navigating a space and deciding what the experiences that you want to have. Steve Jobs, for instance, has this one quote in his book that talks about him being able to orchestrate the long grass, and he heard opera. Mozart, he heard classical music, and he was making the grass grow and things like that. And I remember having that trigger in an LSD experience in the field, and was able to invoke that idea and have a similar experience. So I thought you had more of a control. But I think with doses, it's always tricky, because when you break a dose of a threshold with LSD, mushrooms, and DMT, for me, it's always been the same, where I can no longer function externally, and I have to sit, lay down, close my eyes, and go on a different journey, so to speak. So there's always that threshold. You won't die. You won't be able to function. You'd have to it would be dangerous for you to try to walk if you have if the world's perceived to be moving, almost like you're in a ship.
So, from what I understand about LSD, LSD is almost like a psychic rotor-rooter of sorts. At least for me, in the times that I did take it, it was a way to eliminate past baggage. It takes all the psychic detritus away, so to speak. I don't know if was that your experience during it?
All the LSD experiences that I have had have not been a bit spiritual. They've always been with people in like party environments, not party in the sense where you're just it's like a music festival, outdoor festival. But it's always been me having to be present and engaging and chatting and calling things that they were each experiencing. Nothing where I'm like doing inner work. I haven't been put to do inner work under those circumstances.
So set and setting again, right? So that could obviously color the experience.
Yeah, and I've never done acid by myself. Actually, I shouldn't say that. I did have a trip to South America when I was working, and I did encounter access to it, and I did it in a hotel. But I went around. They had a art exhibit, and I did it, and then I was just enjoying the art, so to speak, but nothing spiritual. It was me being present and enjoying the experience as it was happening and the distortions of what I was seeing as it was occurring. But I think setting by myself in a dose where the mind has no choice but to resign to the fact that you're no longer in control. I think that's when I get to do inner work, and it has to be by myself.
Okay, so you choose that by yourself piece of it.
Yeah, because even when I've had the ayahuasca ceremonies in a group environment, they've never materialized like they've materialized by myself.
So psilocybin journeys, what would you agree, about 4 hours long, more or less, 4 to 5 hours?
I think
something in that
4 hours, you're good. 5, you start wanting to speak to somebody about what you saw. And then 6, it's like the glow, and you're riding this glow for the next 7 days.
How do you feel about taking notes or somehow integrating? Because part of the trip is integration, right? That's probably, some people say, the most important part.
Yeah.
You take what you've learned and you bring it back to this plane of existence and you sort of integrate it.
Yeah, I think the idea of exercising what you experience into words, which you can reference the Bible, and everything starts with the word, right? So if you want to be mystical about the experience, careful what you're trying to integrate into your reality from that experience, right? So like for me, currently doing yoga, I'm working on my flows, I'm getting certified, I'm integrating alchemy and transmuting the idea of solid metals or base metals into gold, but I'm referring to metals as emotions. So it's base emotions into love and kindness. Right? So if I have trauma and it's visceral in the experience, and I come out and start explaining to people my trauma, I'm now deepening that narrative. I'm now making that record player with needle make that one song deeper into the play. Now it's right. Maybe it's you figuring out how to transmute that trauma and nip it in the butt, and maybe that's what you had as the acid, where you were able to like have your inner work and change that and let that baggage go and no longer be part of your narrative, right? So integration's important because it forces you to face what you just experienced and put it into words, but also very dangerous in how it's done. And there's some circles that you're supposed to integrate just with the shaman or the ayahuasquero and not a group share, because then you realize you're so open. Maybe you didn't have a trauma, but you heard someone speak about theirs, and now you're thinking about yours that you didn't think before. So
that's a big issue. A new brother of ours, Freddie, we'll just call him for now.
Freddie.
And he is
doctor.
A psychiatrist, medical doctor. He doesn't buy that therapy is worth a darn. He doesn't think therapy really works. And that's a doctor's opinion, somebody who prescribes certain things. He's outside the box of it's not the typical Prozac stuff and the way, the stuff that is typically given. But he doesn't buy the fact that therapy works. So that sort of gets a little bit at your point. I personally feel that therapy works if you work it. Like, having gone through therapy, several years of therapy and other such, I feel like it does work, but I feel like it's a massive self-indulgence at the same time. And it could be a huge time waster if you're there to waste time. It, like anything else, is a modality that could bring you some good effects if used in that way. So, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree to a degree. And as you were talking, I heard Terrence McKenna, videos that I've watched, say, don't be afraid of going at it alone. The fact that you think, and I'm not saying you literally, like, let's say I'm Freddie. I'm not Freddie because he's a doctor, right? So I'm Joe, and Joe's like, you know what? I may need to talk to somebody, right? Great. The act of talking is like a soundboard in a safe place of someone you don't know, so you can kind of be like, I'm going to say this, and I'll never see this dude or this person ever again. And there's more to therapy, right? So it's a sounding board, and now you have to do work. Versus, look at me, I'm the victim. I got to speak to this person regularly about the same things I continue to do to my life and to my people or to my family daily. It's almost like you can commit all the sins you want, but go on Sunday and do your confession, and then you can get the host, and then do your bloody Hail Marys, and you're done. But then I'm going to do it again, and it's okay to do it again, because my God's forgiven, and I got to tell my priest, and I got to do the host, and I got to do it again. And then, so that's what's happening there. But if you're a person you think you need help and you go get it and you have that discussion and it could potentially lead you into now I got to do this, great. But that's where it goes. And I think in Western medicine, the idea of our capitalistic tendencies to keep the doors turning and the money flowing, I can see perhaps some doctors say, well, this person just wants a subscription. Let me appease them. They'll keep coming. We got a business. It's not about healing. It's just about you doing what you want to do, having the space to say what you did, and I'm sorry, and here's your prescription. I can see that. But it can't be everybody. I also refuse to add that to my narrative. Because it'd be very sad. For me, it'd be very sad to come to a realization that I'm in a world where most people don't want to do anything for themselves, one. Or two, that whatever they end up doing for themselves is selfish. I think I'd be very sad. And most people would say, it's what it is, Nestor. Stop being so naive. But when you travel and you go to other countries that have less, they sure give more.
That's interesting. So we've talked about that. Let's get into grandmother's house. So if we, the big serpent, the serpent mother, whatever you want to call her, ayahuasca. And you broke out DMT as being separate from that. So would like to talk about DMT being the active ingredient in ayahuasca, can be synthesized separately. And we spoke briefly about what that might look like. Smoked as a crystal, I believe, or shot intravenously, I think, which is what they did at the New Mexico trials.
Rick
Strassman.
What is the book he has?
The God molecule or the miracle?
Spirit molecule.
The spirit molecule. DMT, the spirit molecule.
Right.
Yes.
They did that intravenously, and they experienced. It's a study, the first psychedelic study since it's been banned, and I think he got it approved in the 90s and did a bunch of studies where it's just, let's see how people's body react to this psychedelic substance. And the fact that this guy was able to interview everyone, and they all mentioned that they had entities and they were visited, and everything was almost like as they were hearing each other saying the same and describing the same. DMT and ayahuasca, I think, have very similar of expressions, and those expressions tend to translate into gold. I feel like both have gold as almost like their filter.
How do you mean that?
Like as if you were to have, like, you know how you can add filters, and you like the Matrix movie, they added a green filter so everything had like a greenish tonish.
Oh yeah.
Like
Miami Vice did that with a blue filter,
most
of the movie's blue. Yeah.
Right. So it's like everything's kind of like a deep gold, and a deep gold with like almost a red-orange play. But ayahuasca, DMT was extremely fast, accelerated. It was hard to make sense of what was going on. It was thrusting you into places. Imagine yourself being pushed or launched out of a cannon and just twirling into space and then landing in some net. And then the ayahuasca, you will have the experience of watching it from a distance, watching as it's happening, watching it in slow motion. Let's see the instant replay. So you get almost the full movie 3 or 4 times, different perspectives with like DVR control, versus the DMT where it's just you being launched out of a catapult and just things, just too much to receive and to handle. You don't know what that is, other than it just disintegrated any belief of anything that you had before experiencing it. If you walk in thinking of life a certain way, you'll walk out questioning what you thought life was that certain way.
So the beginning of it, right? And I'd love to hear your experience. But so when I took it, the normal thing is you're breathing air, right? Air is over here, you're over here, and you're breathing the air in and out.
This is ayahuasca, right?
This is ayahuasca. This is actually DMT, actually. At some point, then, the air is breathing you in. And at one point, you just stop breathing altogether because you're just together with the air and there is no separation. So I'm sure you're still breathing on some level, but you're not. It no longer becomes a thing that you're aware of or part of your immediate reality, so to speak. Thoughts?
I would agree. When I first had the experience, I did free-based DMT. At the time, I was toying with it with a cannabis pipe and a little bit of cannabis, toying it with the sense where I would almost like not smoke it all, like almost like taste it, like what is it, how do I feel?
Did you use the DMT as the base of chaga on top? I'm sorry, the weed on the base of chaga, and then put the DMT crystals on top, so to speak?
Yeah.
A lot of people do that. What's chaga?
Chaga would be the Banisteric copy leaf, which is the monoamine oxide inhibitor, which is the other plant. So ayahuasca is 2 plants, Psychotria viridis and Banisteric copy vine. The Psychotria viridis, or the Mimosa hostilis, have the DMT component, and the other Banisteric copy is the MOI, monoamine oxide inhibitor, also another antidepressant. It turns off a protein in your liver, or in other words, it forces your body not to detoxify what you're going to consume, which is why you have to have the dieta. You can't be eating meat. You can't have alcohol. You have to be clean because you're going to turn off something that's supposed to make sure you don't get poisoned, to have the DMT not be broken down in your gut and it get to your bloodstream.
Another way to say that is it lowers the blood-brain barrier.
There you go.
Right? So that allows then the thing to actually act upon your brain, because DMT is naturally produced in the body.
Yes.
So the body knows how to get rid of it very quickly. It just gets... If you just drink DMT or take the ayahuasca B-Cappy vine, that will just metabolize in your stomach, and you will never achieve any of this stuff unless you take the MOI inhibitor to lower the blood-brain barrier first.
Right. So what I was doing was, instead of doing the changa, I was doing a little bit of weed and the crystals to see what I was feeling, and I didn't want to like really go in deep because I wasn't sure what that was going to be like. And then I did that long enough where when I was doing that, it was more it felt subtle, like a psilocybin trip, wherein the mushroom hits and anything that has texture becomes almost like inundated with liquid, and you have like little rivers, and you have things kind of breathe, inhale and exhale, and I felt like, oh, that's it. And then when I looked at what I had left, I go, okay, well, it's either now or ever for me to know what this really is going to be like, and I freebase it just to crystals, and I did more than I should have, and what I felt was...
That seems to be a usual thing for you.
Yes. It is, yeah. So normally what you're supposed to do is take 3 massive hits, holding the third as long as you possibly can.
Yes.
With this one, I didn't have 3 hits. I burned it so fast that I just engulfed something. I felt it. It filled my lungs. And before I expect to exhale, I immediately saw almost like a white noise from a TV when the old TVs used to turn on or off, where it was I saw that coming from the peripherals, but became Pythagorean triangles. And then they became multicolored, and they attracted my attention. I had forgotten to breathe by then. Like, there was, like, yeah, I took it. There's breath. I go to exhale, and I'm no longer here because these things caught my attention, and I'm petrified. I do remember wanting to lay myself down, but almost like if I'm in a VR and I go to lay myself down, what I'm seeing is still what I'm seeing. It's not like I'm seeing something else. So the experience is inundating my peripheral and my body, where I feel like I'm detaching from my body, but these geometric shapes are insisting that I look at them. Then it goes black. It's a cube. The cube opens to a white cross. The white cross bears a rose. The rose opens. A jaguar comes out of the rose. It eats me. I feel like I'm propelled into the mouth of the jaguar. I remember seeing like a vortex spinning me through, and then I land, almost like in an assembly belt, like a factory. But it's like people call them machine elves here. But at the same time, I'm outside. I'm inside a factory that's outside in nature, and I'm trying to make sense of all this. And a lot of imagery at the time was imagery of things that I was reading. I was reading Egyptian stuff. I was reading a lot of Masonic stuff, so checkerboards, like all the symbolism that we talk about in our ritual was showing up in this experience, and you're trying to make sense of it. 10 minutes, like all this shit's happening. Like, sorry, all these things. Hey, how long was that? Did I curse?
It was pretty good. Yeah.
Not bad, right?
Pretty good.
In 10 minutes. And then what gives you the cue that you're coming back is a full-blown mushroom or LSD experience. I remember laying on my couch and looking to the side. I had a shelf that had hanging wine glasses, and the wine glasses were rubber banding, meshing with the floor and coming back. Me seeing that was like, oh, thank God I did not die, because I swore I had died. Ayahuasca was way different. I mean, even from the build-up, because the DMT, I had it, I felt it, I was playing with it, and then all of a sudden all these things happened, and I had no way of explaining what happened. With ayahuasca, I planned it. I went to Colombia. I had 2 potential shamans to reach out to and figure out how it's going to happen. You're in the Amazons. You're kind of already embedded. You're slowing down because you're you're almost like in a vacation mode. You're kind of enjoying things. And then you meet the shaman. There's a hike you have to go, because you have to go to a part of the country where you're not going to be interrupted, and the authorities are not looking to arrest or to fine anybody for doing things they shouldn't. There's areas where certain native people can do it, and there's no problems, and you kind of have to hike there in the jungle. Then you have to set up a hammock so you're distracted with the environment.
So you went to Colombia, not to Peru?
I went to Colombia, not to Peru.
Is there a reason why you chose Colombia over Peru?
Because I'm Colombian, and when I said I needed to do my ancestry, I wanted to go to where I would be if I was a person living in ancient times.
Understood.
So that's where I went. That's my motherland. That's my makeup. And I think I did it well, because it was not a negative experience. As soon as I had the drink, actually, let me step back, because it's very Masonic for those who understand our ritual, and you kind of have to prepare a space. The shamans uses tobacco.
Just to give all 3 of us know each other. We're all Freemasons.
Oh, yeah.
Not that this has anything to do with Freemasonry at all. This is a totally different thing. And but there are certain illusions that, because everything is connected in the universe, that this would obviously be connected to some level with that. Please go ahead.
Yeah, right on. Thanks for clarifying that. Yeah. What was I saying?
You were talking about
shaman and setting up the space.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, Masons. Sorry, not Masons. The shamans. So we have a space where everybody kind of sits and gets ready to have an experience. And tobacco is I mentioned Masons because of tobacco. We smoke cigars and we have scotch.
Sure.
And then there's a component of a similar thing to the scotch. So we're having cigars. The shaman has to smoke and kind of like blow the smoke to clear out the air, breaks up the cigar and circumscribes the perimeter with tobacco to make sure that the evil spirits or the area is secure. Whether you believe on the evil spirits or if this is whatever, I can tell you, being in a foreign place, already being a little bit wary, uneasy, you can attach to that narrative very easily to find comfort. Right? So I was like, okay, I don't necessarily believe this is going to do anything, but I'll do it to make myself, I'm going to grab onto this so I can feel a little bit more comfortable about what I'm doing. So he preps the space, hands out instruments, and we have to clear out the negative energy by chanting, singing, lift the spirits. Why is everybody so quiet? Like you can feel the tension because everybody's nervous. It's 5 of us. And then from there, this is 8 o'clock. We're playing the instruments 9 o'clock. We're getting to know each other. It's 10 o'clock. 11 o'clock, we make sure that the hammocks are comfortable. We have enough candles. The fire pit, we have enough fire. And the shaman starts to inform us that it's not going to happen until about an hour later. So you're already like 3 hours and nothing's happened and you're anticipating. And then it gets late. Jungle gets louder. You start to get sleepy. So they introduce something called rape or en lambil, basically tobacco snuff.
Rape or hape?
Rape is what we call it, R-A-P-E. And lambil, L-A-M-B-I-E-L. It's like fermented tobacco snuff that is blown into your nose. It kind of like wakens you up a little bit.
Sure does.
And then lambil is like almost like a tobacco chew, but it's a paste. So you just kind of paste it in the bottom of your lips. So the idea is that the rape clears your head and it makes you more conscious. The lambil kind of keeps you awake throughout the experience. And then he hands out the cups. You have to go to the altar. He hands you a cup. You drink it. You give it back. If there's women, they have to go first. Women goes first. Men go last. And in that ceremony, he gave everybody one drink. You go to your hammock and you start to just kind of like relax and let the brew catch up to you. Some have a second I think I had a second. I think after the second, I don't think they give you a third. But for me, as soon as I had the second, and I felt something was off when I had the first. The shaman came and asked me if I was okay, and I go, I think I'm okay. And the fact that I responded, well, I guess was his cue because he goes here, and I took it. As soon as I took the second one, I yawned, and that yawn almost like the biggest yawn you can imagine, but it never ends. A yawn that never ends. And as soon as I open my mouth and I look back, I'm transported into a black void, and I'm suspended in the black animation. And from a distance, I see like little waves of like colors. And as it gets close, I realize it's a serpent. It's like a multicolored, feathered serpent just coming around. It would come up and then bend its head down, but it never showed its front face to me. And then I felt my ego. What is she feeding people? Like, what is she doing? Why is she not paying attention to me? And as soon as I said that thing reared its head and goes to put something in my mouth, and I take it, and it transported me into a memory. And then that memory continued to replay itself until I reacted a certain way. And the only way I was able to overcome that memory is if I was compassionate. And then I was brought back to where the serpent was, filled with euphoria and thankfulness, and I can't believe it, and I feel so much love. And then before I can even digest that, it rears its head and gives me another memory. And that went on for what I felt like was forever. To the point where when I came back from my yawn, the sunlight was coming out, the shaman's music stopped. People almost like they start to wake up like in the morning, like we felt like we were waking up from sleep. With the exception is when you go to put your foot down, as soon as you go to put the mud gives way, almost like you're in outer space, and then you realize I'm still loopy and tripping. Things are moving, but I'm here and I had my experience. You pack up and you go. So it happened I think that lasted 7 o'clock. We woke up. So we took it 11:30, and it felt like I was out of that dream state 7:30ish. And then we were hiking out of the forest, and then I didn't feel like I was normal again until I was in a bus leading us to the dock where we had to get a little boat back to our hostel, so to speak. And that was another hour.
How many days? So you just did one session?
One session.
Okay, because sometimes people are there for a week. They will do several doses over several days, and they would have whatever type of experience they were going to have with that. So for you, it was 1 day, one session. Interesting.
Yeah, it was 1 day with the medicine, and I was there for 8 days. So we got there, and we basically hung out in the area with the locals, eating a fruitarian diet and drinking water.
Also, they want to make sure you were ready. So you did a dieta before that. So tell people what a dieta is.
Well, dieta could be expressed in many ways, but the one that I'm familiar with and that I did was basically cleaning your body of all toxins, to empty your body to the basically as best as you can. So that means no meats, no cheeses, nothing fermented, no alcohol, no sex. You can't have any kind of orgasm whatsoever. So you have to abstain, and you have to do that minimum 7 days. And then from there, you should have 24 to 48 hours if you can without anything, just water, empty stomach. So when you have the brew, your body is just itching to absorb whatever you're going to give it because it's in starvation mode, if you ask me. I think it's really for that. And the second thing is when you're having these mystical or out-of-body experiences, the last thing you want is to feel the need to go to the bathroom, or in most cases, people have a purge. I genuinely do believe that the purge happens because we did not follow the dieta. Because I've had moments where I would say, "Oh, screw it! I'll have this mozzarella stick because I had my son on the Wednesday and my ceremony is going to be on the following Sunday, and I had that cheese stick, and then I'm puking, right? Or if I follow it, nothing negative happens to the body. I'm being rewarded with good memories. I'm having an experience. It's different. But anyway, that's the dieta. So you have to adhere to a certain diet and lifestyle before you take on the medicine. So you're open and it is willing to teach you because you've put in a little work too. You're not just showing up and hoping they have it all, give it to you,
Interesting. So DMT, did you notice a different reaction from the people or entities you met on the other side because of the lack of time?
Yeah.
And the reason I bring that up is when I went there, they're like, hey, pay attention because we don't have a lot of time and we need to tell you blah, 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 blah. Yeah. As opposed to ayahuasca, it was like an all-day thing. So it was, although mine never lasted more than 5 hours. After the 5-hour mark, pretty much I would vomit up the MAOI inhibitor, and then shortly thereafter, the trip would end.
Yeah. And I'll be honest, I don't know if I can gauge the time, because time seems so funny in those spaces too. Enough for me, when I came back from my DMT, I came back convinced that time is an illusion. Like, we all made up time and we all subscribe to this stuff, and time doesn't even exist. And I had a hard time with that, no pun intended. But my difficulty with digesting the concept of time was because of the idea of you wanted to exhale and then you forgetting how to breathe. And I felt like I felt like DMT got me to be more aware of an expanded time, so to speak. Like, I'm aware now of the milli, of the trimillion, of the,
It's like time dilation that we talked about in the last episode.
Yeah, definitely time dilation.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about that, just to refresh the people's mindsets on time dilation? Since you so wonderfully brought it up, go ahead.
I think we'll revert back to Eric on that one.
All right, refer back to episode 1, please. Moving on.
well, speaking of time dilation, I mean, like, the idea of you getting in the zone and you being focused on something and not realizing how time, that idea. I think the psychedelic realm does that a lot. It's what the tribesmen used to do for hunting. Before they had a hunt, they'd take like a little more than a microdose, or more like a regular dose, so to enhance their experience and be more tuned into what's going on. So I think time dilation isn't all that. I know with weed anyway, when I smoke, my days are longer. I feel like I get so much done. It sounds weird for a stoner to say, yeah, I'm so productive when I'm stoned. But it's true. I remember one day I was late for a flight. I woke up late when I was drinking. I don't drink anymore. And I woke up hungover, and I'm like, oh, man, I'm going to be late. And I remember driving. The anxiety of me missing this business flight back. I smoke a J, and I kid you not, I felt like time just dilated. I got there in time enough for me just to walk in, sit in my chair, and then be like, okay, we're going to be closing in 5 minutes. And I was ripping it to the highway, though.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So we talked about, you ever do Bufo?
No. So 5-MeO DMT, I have not.
Talk about that. So
the bufo frog, which is in North America, there in Arizona, right? So it's the frog that they excrete the poison from its back, lets it dry, and then you scrape it and you smoke that. It's DMT extracted from the animal. 5-MeO, which I think is a toxin, so there is a toxicity to it that your body does go through. I hear it's unpleasant.
It is. I ripped the shirt off me like I was Hulk Hogan last time.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I haven't had that experience yet. In fact, I was looking for it. Well, I used to work for a telecommunications company. We had a call center in Mexico, in the Sonora Desert, in Hermosillo. Shout out to my people in Mexico. And they have los zapoteros. Zapoteros is the people who handle the sapo is frogs.
Sapo is frogs.
Sapo is frog. Zapoteros is the people who handle the frogs.
The frogsters.
Right, the frogsters. The frogsters. And they are a protected indigenous group who own a protected land, and no one can get access to the land unless the tribesmen vote and accept you to walk in. If you do tours, there's a protocol, paperwork you have to do.
Now, what is the proper name of the Zapoteros? Do they have a tribal name that they go by?
They probably do it. I don't know.
Okay, fair enough.
I'm sorry.
Frogsters it is. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, in the Sonora Desert.
In the Sonora Desert.
So there's Mexican natives, indigenous Mexican tribes in the Sonora Desert. I'm sure Google will tell us.
Yes, I'm sure. We'll put it up if we find it. We'll put up the link.
And so anyway, I was trying.
No disrespect meant, by the way.
No, not at all. And I was trying to get access to them to get approved to go and like meet and then ask when I was there. But because of work schedules and their protocols, it was almost impossible. I think if you want to do it, you got to like stay a month, go on a Saturday, go the next Saturday where then you meet the person that's supposed to ask for permission. Then you go to the third Saturday. Okay, you got permission. It's one of those type of.
Wow, it takes a while.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyway, I have not had that experience. Am I curious to? Yes. It frightens me more than NN-DMT through the plant because I know that there is going to be a toxicity to it, and I know it's going to be a little unpleasant at first. But if it shows up and I'm able and willing, then I think I'd do it. It's a very tricky thing.
It's a tricky thing.
I think the other thing to mention is people get really upset about the idea of psychedelics, and we don't want it in our culture. We don't want our kids knowing about it. It's going to make people junkies. They're going to be unproductive to society. And I think a lot of that's false. No one, if anybody's addicted to this stuff, it's not. It's so frightening to go through it. I don't think you're going to be up for doing it again until something really drastic is happening in your life and you need another shake up or wake up call. It's frightening. I mean, I've had the ability. I've been invited to do other ceremonies. Hey, I'll come with me, or can you take me and I'll pay for you? And I'm like, I don't know if I can, because it's very frightening.
So some people, they go on one trip, and that's enough for a lifetime. You're unpacking that trip for the rest of your life. Some people have done it a lot, for whatever their own personal reasons may be, or they're working on things bigger than themselves, like ancestral traumas, familial traumas, past lives, other things like that. Can you talk a little bit about that? Are you familiar with past lives? And
past lives?
Ancestral stuff?
I can't say that I'm familiar with past lives. I know that if I allow myself to do like past life meditations through the yoga channels that I've had, I'm still clinging on the idea of me deciding the narrative. So when I allow myself to go into that state, I see myself as every possible person. Like there's
like a dream, basically, where you're everyone in your dreams.
Like a dream, and I'm everybody in my dream. I say, where were you? Well, I was a warrior. I was a king. I was a peasant. I was all these. I'm all of them always. And then I stay there, and I'm like, well, what is my past life? Well, like you're all of it. Like I get lost there, and that's why I can't. And most people have those experiences and come down and go, I just realized that I was this person in this decade, and I was battling these issues, and I'm still carrying. I've never had that. Like, as soon as I attach to the person that I'm seeing myself as, I can detach and go on to the next version of myself, and then detach.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, ideally, and when we talk about time not being a real concept, everything happens.
A
construct. It was, everything happens all at once, right? So we are, I think, everybody. And on some level, and that's getting back to what Eric was talking about last time around, where, time is a construct that allows us to have an experience on this plane of existence rather than everything happening at once and it being over. But the reality is the present is the only real thing, right? The past is gone. Right. The future hasn't happened. So the only thing we can ever experience is the present.
Is there any psychedelic that people have done that everyone has a similar experience to? Like, I think you had alluded to in the past that you saw, like, this alien race or whatever it was. Did you want to describe that?
That was an interesting thing. So I was on a psilocybin journey, and I saw these, what to me looked like mantids, but now more like ant aliens, if that makes sense.
Operating in your brain.
Insectoid. No. Basically, the guy was like, think of an ant if he's a schoolyard bully. And he's like, hey, bud. Hey. I was sort of floating around. He's like, hey, I got something to say to you. By the way, you guys, you humans, yeah, you're all a client race to us. You're a slave race. The minute you wake up and you're going to be, quote, unquote, dead, what you think? You're going to be chained to an oar. We own your butts. And from now on, enjoy that. It's like he's trying to, be sort of that bully type of scary. Like, I'm going to impose on you kind of thing. But the funny part was that scariness, that trying to be bravado kind of thing, almost pulls you out because you're like, I'm not buying it. But I was freaked out, admittedly. Talked to the shaman afterwards, and he gave me the story that the guy who, I forget who it was, that wrote The Way of the Shaman, we'll put it in the link too, The Way of the Shaman, the guy there had an interesting experience. So he was like Castañeda from the Journeys of Don Juan. But instead of going to Mexico, he went down to, I believe, Central America. And it was very interesting because he was talking about, he had a similar experience, And in that tribe, they look at the world being the dream and the psychedelic realm being the real life. And you go there and you bring wisdom back that you then give to the tribe, and everybody's the better for it. So the shaman was after him. Tell me what you saw. Tell me what you saw. The guy's like, nah, I really don't want to. I feel weird about it. I didn't have a great... Because everyone else who was there had a great trip, and they came back with all this wisdom and blah, blah, blah. So finally, after about a week of the shaman prodding him, he gave up and said, look, this is what I experienced. And then the shaman starts laughing. He goes, yeah, they're always saying that. There's much more important things in the universe than those guys. They have no idea what they're talking about. They're a bunch of myopic aliens that just see their own world and think they rule everything. They don't rule anything. Don't worry about it. So, that was the trip. And the fact that I sort of had it and this guy had it in that same realm was interesting. And it kind of gets back to the idea they're trying to map the psychedelic realm now. Have you heard about that?
Well, I thought Masons had a roadmap.
Oh, interesting.
For
Very
navigating the psychedelic realm. And I also thought that Masonic ritual was done with psychedelics as its key focal point. None of that's true.
Boy, you're disappointed.
I was like, really? Oh, get this smell from your mind, any preconceived notions.
But there is a book on what every Master Mason ought to know, written by Gerard Ancas, called Pappas. It's it's a short book, thin book. He was a Mason, among other things. And he writes about traveling. So Masons are called traveling men to some extent. Won't get into what all that means. But his idea of traveling was astral projection. And part of it was when you're an entered apprentice, you need to understand and be led through certain experiences. When you're a fellow craft, which is the central degree of the three, then you're allowed more liberty. And as a Master Mason, you're allowed full liberty to go by yourself and all of that stuff. Look, it's one perspective. Another one, W.L. Wilmshurst, who wrote in the late 1800s, he has a very esoteric view on what Masonry is. People obviously vary quite a bit. Some people in Masonry are not esoteric whatsoever. They have their own viewpoint on what it is. Some people view it as a fraternity, but of course this episode's not about Freemasonry.
But the roadmap you're talking about, I feel like the Egyptians in the Book of the Dead had the same roadmap because when I read that, they really alluded to making sure that the person kept their conscience and knew how to respond through the different doors of the afterlife to be able to achieve whatever they were looking to achieve, either reincarnation. I forget what they're looking to achieve. But there was one that would describe certain things and certain tests and certain words and grips that you needed to respond to be able to be allowed in to the next level of whatever that death journey is. So I haven't heard people mapping the psychedelic realm. I don't know if it's mappable, but it'd be pretty cool to at least understand how to navigate the space, so to speak. So mappable, like in the sense where, have you seen that new, I'm going to digress, Apple TV, Dark Matter. It's a new series.
I thought you were going to bring up Three-Body Problem. Because that's another interesting one.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
But this one talks about superimposing the person to be able to be, because we're all in one place. So you go in the box, you superimpose yourself, and then you can access a different level of reality or a different parallel universe or whatever.
Did you see Westworld?
I did.
Very similar idea, right? So what is real life and how does it pertain to this? Yeah, but please talk more about it.
But the reason I thought of this particular show was because there's this component about before you open the door, whatever you're feeling and thinking is what's the reality is going to be out there. So there's an influence upon by the observer to how that reality is going to be. So the idea of mapping and being able to navigate the space, for me, is the alchemical stone, which for me is the ability of your brain subconsciously transmuting base emotions into love and kindness. Because when you're in those space, particularly with mushrooms, I remember having the experience of looking down and thinking death and seeing blood, seeing carnage. and then looking up and seeing a cloud and go, what if that was a bunny? And then just started creating different, like imagining different shaped clouds like you do when you're a kid and you're with your parents and you look at that cloud, and I found joy. And then I went back and, well, I feel this carnage. Then I found joy. And then I looked finally down again to the carnage and I started laughing at it.
Mm-hmm.
And it grew and budded, it became flowers, and the bunnies that were clouds now started hopping. So I was like, well, hell, what if we all were capable of inadvertently, whenever we feel something that is us being judged, us being attacked, us being insulted, gets transmuted, and we think that we've been just complimented and we act positively. Like, so for me, I think the psychedelic space is fragmented and chaotic because of our own psyche. Mm-hmm. Because I also genuinely believe that back in time, when religion was a little more in its purest form, we would have these experiences regularly to remind us of what we really are, or what we thought we were at that time in that narrative, which is good people, custodians of the planet and of each other. Like all the good things we say humans have the capacity of being.
That is fascinating. Have you read about this mapping of the psychedelic realm? So
I have not.
So they're talking about, so-and-so saw the machine elves, right? So you talked about Terence McKenna. He mentioned the machine elves. You might have seen them yourself. I never have. I saw a triangle riding a bicycle, for what that's worth. And what was interesting was this little triangle was kind of like one of those little South Park episodes. Like it's a herky-jerky sort of cartoon. And it's a little triangle, and he's riding a bicycle. He's very happy. He's got little arms and legs and a face.
That's great.
And he gets off the bicycle, and he starts telling me, and he's speaking in his own strange language, which is like, Strawberry Tuesday champagne. And I'm like, oh, tequila Wednesday jam, whatever. And I spoke his little language. He spoke mine. We were very happy with each other. Then he got back on his bicycle and rode off. That sounds nuts, obviously. I fully own up to that, but that was the experience that I had in that moment of whatever that was like. And
so, yeah, amongst friends, there's always those, like, did you see this? And I saw something similar. I didn't say what you said. So I saw the horn alien telling me, no, don't do it. No, don't do it. And I'm like, no, don't do what? I was freebasing the DMT. And then when I said, well, don't do what? And I look at what I was doing, I was using a plastic straw, and I had a match. I was like, well, if I use this plastic straw is going to melt. The plastic straw was melting. I had to go get a metal straw. So I was like, something detached from my reality to give me a cue to look at what I was doing, trying to get to one place, and then reassess and readjust and go change my instrument. The other similar, like, weird thing was, you guys know that face from Asbury Park?
Yeah, on the Wonder.
So my man showed up in my experience doing the Running Man. It was just doing the Running Man, and then it turned its head and then doing the Running Man. I'm like, well, this is interesting, right? And then as I pan from the Running Man, I get to the factory of what appeared to be Egyptian sarcophagi cases, and they were mass producing these tombs. It's like, oh, what is this, the body, or is this a manufacture of humans, or is it manufactured of souls? And we all have like similar. The thing with that, my guess, if I were to bet money on it, with whatever little things I know, my ignorance, is we are all sharing, like Steph Pisces, we're all sharing the idea of it, we're all sharing the dream. So we all have this psyche, we all have this base programming of understanding reality. So we're all gonna be interpreting certain things. It's like the rickshaw or whatever. We're all interpreting things with this almost same lens, because the people, we're American, or we're human, whatever our makeup is. Like, it's a tree because you were a kid that told you it was a tree. Green is green, orange is orange. So with that idea of I lost my train of thought here, because what we were talking about was the
mapping of the consciousness. But can I ask
Please.
you, so you mentioned the guide, right? This is back to the psilocybin journey, right? So yeah. So some of the things. So talk a little bit about the mapping of the psilocybin journey, so to speak. So what happens first? How do you get into it? What happens then, and how do you exit?
Oh, okay.
Right.
Okay. So with the mushrooms, the way that experience works for me is
because you've had that a bunch of times repeat, right? So some of it has.
Yeah, but it never takes me out of the place, even though I'm in a deep dose. In the first cue of me knowing that it's happening is the drying of the sinuses. Like there's a moment where I'm breathing and I feel like the air is different. It's like colder, and my sinuses are different. There's this moment of brief nausea, which leads me to believe almost like a seasickness. Like the nausea is telling me that the world's gonna start to move a little bit, and there is
or the roller coaster coming down, right?
Yeah, so, it's like a roller coaster, that little like stomach feeling, right. Yeah. And then those are the cues. And then once I know I'm in the space, everything's alive. Everything's extremely colorful. If there's sharp shapes, it's kaleidoscoping. If there's grooves, it's inundated with fluid. And air is more than air. I sense and you feel moisture in the air. And then I can choose at that point, do I close my eyes or do I stay here? I've stayed here and gone on hikes, or I've closed myself in a room in complete darkness, and my mind starts to construct images like a movie in places with people having dialogues and telling me things or explaining me things or me having a conversation with them. And there's always this moment where they feel the need to say, well, it was nice talking to you. And like they have to close the conversation, or me get a sense of, oh, I have to leave now. And then that's when I feel compelled to open my eyes. And then I realize that not everything is as bright, not everything is as sharp. Everything's still breathing, and I'm still in that space, but I'm not fully immersed in it. So that's how it works for me. The only places that plug me out of this reality would be the ayahuasca and the DMT.
But talk about the specifics of the trip. In other words, the guide, what does the guide do? What does he offer you, right? He all the various pathways and like that kind of stuff.
Okay, so the experience of having someone telling me which narratives and present me shapes, that was on DMT.
Okay.
I didn't have it with the mushroom, the DMT.
I did, but that was interesting because there was a guy there with like almost like he was selling Rolexes. Like, hey, you want to buy this, you want to buy this, you want to buy, and he was it was crazy stuff because it was completely amoral. He didn't care what you did. You could have been chopping off baby arms, or you could have been, having the bunny adventure, whatever the case may be. It was totally irrelevant to him. He's like, do you want this? Do you want this? Do you want that? Do you want that? So
my person asking me what I wanted was right after a mountain forced me to bow. So I saw a mountaintop, the sun came, I bowed, and when I looked back up, she was dressed in gold with jewelry, and her noises were almost like loud chipmunks mixed with potato chip bags being squished, and it was shape after shape, so much that I was overwhelmed. I was like, I don't know if I want anything. There's just too much. I was getting overwhelmed because I felt like I was being forced to pick something out of all these millions of possibilities. And when I got overwhelmed, I kid you not, I go, oh, marketing. I was like, damn, this is like straight up propaganda. Like just advertising. Do I even need to make a choice here? Like, do I have to pick something? Like, they all look great. and I was like, okay, I have this. And a little bit of me almost felt like, because here's where the esoteric and exoteric is. Why would you have this experience, and how can you get any benefit in the real world? Me having that experience allowed me to realize how certain individuals, like at the time my ex-wife and myself, were with our recently child. Whenever the kid was upset, we both corralled him. Give him a toy. Give him this. He's getting upset. And I stopped. I go, whoa, that's overwhelming. How is that going to calm the kid? It ain't calm me when this person was trying to feed me mystical shapes. I was like, that's very mom-like, right? Like, whoa, I just felt overwhelmed for him because we're all, trying to give him things. And then I go deeper into that thought, and I'm like, well, hell, how do I know that wasn't just a memory of me as a kid and me being upset and mom trying to give me a bunch of things to calm me down? Like, maybe they're toys, and I see them as mystical shapes. because I don't know what I'm seeing. Like, so that's the rabbit hole that these things can lead people, and I enjoy to be led with, right? So, for her, she was a deity giving me things. I felt overwhelmed. I came back and I go, that seems like it's marketing. And I can tell you, I don't watch TV anymore, and partly because of that experience. Turn on TV and people are feeding, have this, have that, have this.
That's why it's called programming.
All right. So that was my experience under DMT, overwhelming, and it still made me want to go to do the traditional ayahuasca experience to kind of condense it all. And if you remember my serpent experience, what was she doing? Feeding me. So that really fast me being fed was too much, and then eventually I had a serpent slowly feed me memories that I had to react with compassion to overcome that level and be up to level 3, up to level 4. You gained experience. You can be compassionate under this circumstance.
How many levels do you think there
I
are?
don't know, man. If there were levels, I don't know, man. If there are levels, there's never-ending levels. It's just like when you go play Donkey Kong, right? Doesn't that just keep going and loopless, and then it starts over to the beginning, and then you can lose yourself? Like YouTube reels. We don't even know when they start or begin. Lose yourself in some YouTube reels, and they're all mishmashed together. I was like, wait a minute, is it 30 minutes? Really?
It's some crazy rabbit holes you go down there.
Hours later, the sun's rising and you're still watching them.
Yeah, you would have asked me years ago, I would have said 33.
Oh, interesting. All right, we'll leave that there. Yeah.
But would you say then that ties into consciousness in any way? From a perspective of like elevating yourself in consciousness.
Yeah, I think what ends up happening, and maps.org describes it, is you have a moment of neurogenesis is equivalent as you being in your mother's womb. So if consciousness has anything to do with your ability to perceive reality, well, more neurons means more experiences, more feelings, which means more understanding of what's going on, more, more gauges to kind of figure out what's the external world like.
Sure.
So yes, before I got divorced, I was seeing a marriage therapist, and he really hit home when he said something to me. He says, imagine you looking at the world through a paper towel cord, like a little cardboard of a paper towel. Look through that hole. That is the majority of people's perception. They can only see through that narrow hole. Experiences broaden that little scope. So if I've only been in Union, New Jersey for the last 60 years and have been with the same people that I graduated and attended school with, speaking the same stuff that we've been having since then I'm seeing my world through that. And anything else is shattering or in existence, or I'm oblivious. Leave a town, leave a country, go do something you shouldn't have done, and feel the flight or fight response that enforces you to kind of wake up from your little dream state. That's all expanding consciousness. So if you can be thrown into a place where it is so unsettling and filled with geometric shapes that no one has ever told you could exist, you'll come back saying, what else is out here? And I feel like that's how it happened for me. It widened my ability to perceive, receive. I'm more tolerant because now I've broken the threshold where I've done things I at one point said I would never do. And most of the people who care about me would say I should never do, right? So I can never be a victim, but I can be a predator. And that forces me to be a little bit more humble about my impact to the world. I can do harm. Like, people can't imagine themselves doing harm. There's people in the world who will not imagine themselves being capable of doing harm to anything or anyone. That is dangerous. We're all capable of the evil stuff that we see or we hear of, but we're also capable of the beautiful things that we hear and we see. But to think that we're not capable of the bad is a very, I think, scary place to be. And when you break that paradigm and you realize that you're
all of it, in other words.
Yeah, right. You're like, whoa. I think it's very useful. In fact, part of me believes that the Egyptians leveraged this as a way of indoctrinating their citizens before they can contribute to their society.
Oh, interesting. It's like a primer.
I feel like, okay, well, guess what? You're now 18 and we're going to make you a member of society. But before we can identify what the level of access you have to our society, here's the rituals you must do, which includes being thrown into a casket, closed in some pyramid for over 24, 48 hours. Manly P. Hall talks about that old ancient rite of passage of the pyramid or something like that. And I genuinely do believe that if politicians had that experience, they would consider things a little bit different. But they're not. They're the ones who've been speaking to the same people, being in the same place. And all their travel, but they're worldly because they go to different countries. Mm-hmm. But they're in boxing from one box to the next. It's all controlled travel, from one box to the next.
So my buddy, who actually introduced me to DMT and to ayahuasca, back in 2017, before I got into acting. And I would say ayahuasca changed my life because it got me into acting, which I never would have thought I would have done as an adult hitting 40. But when that happened, he told me, he recounted his story of going to China to do martial arts. So he went there to intern, in essence, to apprentice at a place up on Wudang Mountain. And what they did was before he was allowed to go onto the mountain to apprentice with these guys, he had to spend 5 days in darkness. And within a pyramid, there was 5 by 5 by 5 by 15, and it had an air hole going up through the center of it. The pyramid was like this sort of heavy stone, and it was made out of big blocks, and they would push this block in, and you're in there for 5 days. And you can't push the block out, so you're in there. And they had food. They had a sort of a chamber pot kind of thing. They had water, so you wouldn't starve. You wouldn't, go dehydrate, but you would be in there. And it's a sensory deprivation. And because of the lack of stimulus of anything in there, you would start to leak DMT out of your pineal gland, let's say. That's one of the theories of where DMT excretes. And it excretes apparently twice in large doses at the moment of birth and the moment of death, where they say that you come in through the seat of the soul is this area here. So that's why you had magicians would wear the pointy hats, the cone hats, to sort of accentuate that part. The Chinese call it the Bahui, or the crown chakra. I'm digressing to say that, he was there for 5 days. He felt like he lived 30 to 40 years in that time period. So, everything that sort of entailed. So
you heard of the old story of the El Dorado, where
the city of gold.
The city of gold. Mm-hmm. That was the story of the Muiscas. The Muiscas, an indigenous tribe in Colombia. Part of their heritage, there's this piece where they would have a child grow or spend their early years in a cave. And then after a certain age, they're allowed to come out and integrate with society. And their impact is designed to drive the appreciation of where they are and their tribe and their culture, that they become almost like their protector or their warrior or their king or their shaman. Mm-hmm. And they do that for them too, because if you've never seen sunrise until you're, 11, 12 years old, that's got to be crazily impactful. Then always seeing it. The sun's always rising. What do you mean? It's every day. It's going to happen tomorrow. Yeah, but I've never seen it. This is the first time, and I'm now a thinking human being, and I've been in a cave for X amount of years. And what is this? And what does that smell? What is that? They do that. The Muiscas. I shouldn't say they do that. They used to do that. And then that person was also the one that was adorned in gold. And then he would take his gold and throw it into the lake, and people wanted the gold that was down in the lake.
So that's very interesting, because gold at the bottom of the lake gets into Iron John, the myth. I don't know if you're familiar. Robert Bly, the poet and men's activist, spoke about Iron John. It was a fairy tale talking about the journey that a man takes. You start out as the Golden Prince, and then you You go down into the subterranean areas where you do ash work, as they call it. Ashes are heaped upon you. You lose your golden mane. You lose all of that stuff. You do the work. We call it shadow work, I guess, in the modern parlance. And then after enough of that is done, you're basically reborn and you end up the wise king. And that's how and that's where, and of course that goes towards the hero's journey that Joseph Campbell was talking about, where it's all circular, right? So the Aboriginals said that you start out and a mountain is just a mountain, a river is just a river. You go on your full journey, and then you understand that, yes, the mountain's just a mountain, but they never seem the same again with all the added knowledge that you've achieved. So, do you have anything to read or recommend, either other than maps, any books that you've read that have had an impact on you, any movies you've seen, anything like that you could talk to our viewers about that would give them an understanding of?
Yes. I think Rick Strassman's was a good one. We mentioned it earlier, the spirit molecule. DMT, the spirit molecule, which was also made into a Netflix documentary with Joe Rogan. They talked about that. I think that was cool because it alleviated the fears of you killing yourself, even though you still have the thought comes when you have it. But you realize that sugar and salt at higher quantities is more dangerous than you consuming these substances. Flat out. There's rats that die when you give them enough sugar and you give them enough salt. It's called LD50. With these substances, no, it won't happen. These being the organic ayahuasca, DMT. I don't know the other synthetic stuff. So that's a good book to go. Brian Maresco, we mentioned him. Okay, if you like the history about ancient civilizations and with our past, how our past may have led us to where we are now, I would say that one. We mentioned MAPS. Arrowwood is the clandestine section for all information related to all substances. MAPS.org is the organization that has allowed the government agencies to consider these substances for therapeutic use. They've funded a lot of the cannabis legalizations that have occurred. They're really the pioneers. Other than that, I can say John Allegro, but that's not necessarily going to be a fun read. To Terrence McKenna. Go to YouTube. Terrence McKenna, actually. Just throw that. Go. Terrence McKenna is the person to listen to.
How do you feel about Alan Watts?
Love Alan Watts.
Right. So he didn't per se talk about psychedelics, but I think he must have been on some because the stuff he did talk about and how he talked about Buddhism and everything, there's got to be some cross section there.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these mystic people or gurus are leaning heavily from their depression state of mind. Alan Watts was suffering depression. You digged up, he had a battle of, I think, bipolarness too, but so it's all depression, so that's where he comes from. And I think that leads to why I think this field is so important for us as humans, like with the idea of post-traumatic stress disorder, all these mental disorders, all these narratives that we've attached to that we're medicating with either alcohol, or including myself with cannabis, or with the diets that we're eating. If you really look at it, this stuff it's useful to people. It needs to be thought by the scientific or medical community as legit science.
Very interesting.
Yeah, but as far as literature, YouTube, Terrence McKenna, maps.org if you want what the science is doing. If you want to find assisted ways of getting guided through this stuff, I think those would be the best. And Arrowwood if you want to know the things you shouldn't know.
Go ahead.
And then what about if somebody is trying to gain access to this? If, like mushrooms and other things, like obviously...
Yeah.
I think the majority of people would think they just have to go to their local drug dealer or something. Not we're advocating that. I'm just asking.
No, the best way is to go to where in the United States it's now regulated and allowed for you to consume things that have been tested and accredited to be working at the level or the dose that it says to do it. Colorado, Washington, California. We mentioned psilocin. There's a company called Neurotropics or in California. They use a combination of psilocin. It's the extraction or synthetic version of psilocybin. So psilocybin is processed by your liver. It becomes psilocin, and that's where you have your experience. The process of digesting the psilocybin, make it into psilocin, gives you the nausea. Psilocybin is organic compound decaying, which with time it loses its shelf life and its potency. So they have these products, whether they're capsules and microdose, chocolates, mints, and you can go to California and get them. California, just look at what states have allowed this, and that's where you would go, and then you'll have not only the access to the substances, but people who've done it, and potentially your guides and your assisted therapies.
Ketamine.
Ketamine scares me. I've never done it.
Okay. Obviously, there are clinics, even in New Jersey, that my understanding, certainly in New York and Massachusetts, a couple of other places, supposedly it's supposed to be excellent for getting rid of addictions, specifically. And repetitive behavior, so, ADHD stuff or what's it, obsessive compulsive disorder, whatever that's called these days, and that kind of thing. So it breaks you out of certain ingrained habits.
I have an ignorant theory about the idea of the industry or the medical field allowing certain substances that are not organic. And it's because they have so much of it already that they need to figure out a way to allow legal use and make money out of it.
That could very well hold water. Who knows?
Yeah. Ketamine scares me because I know I can die from it. MDMA scares me because I know I can die from it.
Have you tried MDMA?
Yes.
To do what? Heart work?
No, it's the same
Or just
scenario.
party
Music, stuff. Yeah. Hey, I'm here. I have LSD. Sure, I'll take that. Oh, hey, we're here. We're gonna do this. We have some whatever. We have this. Yeah, sure. But it's not something that I've said no to that. I've never said no to cannabis. I've never said no to mushrooms. It's stuff that I know will not kill me. It's organic. I think when
that might be a false equivalency there about being organic and won't kill you, but
I guess you're right.
Well, I mean,
take enough and walk off a cliff, and
so that didn't kill you, but the cliff did.
Yeah,
right.
Drop at the end.
Yes.
Yeah. So like all those things scare me, and I think we got excited with the ability of curing people. That we should probably just focus on the stuff that it's easily accessible to people, like. But it's not profit driven. Like, so it's easier for you to grow mushrooms and take smaller doses to battle PTSD. Like, you can spend $60 and make it yourself in your garage. Guaranteed, there's companies in California that will ship it, but you can't do that in New Jersey.
We're not advocating that.
No, you're not.
It is out there.
It's listen. The ball is gonna end. We're gonna be there eventually, where cannabis is treated like tomatoes and mushrooms are treated like
cucumbers.
Sure. Or spores. You'll be able to buy your spores and you can inject your own bags, things like that. But we should stick to that. The other stuff, I mean, Matthew Perry from Friends, it was helping him. It got him off his addiction, but he wanted to do deeper work with it because he got familiar with it, and then the deeper work cost him his life because at higher doses you stop breathing.
Higher doses on what?
Ketamine.
Oh, ketamine.
You stop breathing. And then if you're already of age and you've seen your doctor or your physician for other illnesses, you now mixing other pills. It's just that stuff scares me.
Not to mention, I'm sure the Vicodin had such an impact on his physiognomy over time that he probably wasn't in the best of health to begin with. Yeah. I don't know. I'm speaking ignorantly about that, but it's certainly a possibility.
But that's why that stuff scares me, right? And I think so. The psychedelic world scares mainstream media because of how foreign it is. And now you see the medical field opening up and almost fearless about anything they try to test and get going. I mean, fentanyl was supposed to be a good drug and taking everybody out from all sorts of places. That if we stick to the organic compounds, like I think with just cannabis alone, you can alleviate dependency on opiates. On just cannabis alone. How? You can't stop doing the opiates if you're consuming cannabis, but you can potentially not lead to the prescription of getting the opioid if you're managing pain with cannabis.
Okay.
Right? Once you're in an opiate dependency, that's chemistry. You have the route of going with the medicine field, which is you become dependent on one drug and then slowly become dependent on another one and then eventually become independent of all drugs. It's like a scale. Mushrooms in ayahuasca have been proven with several sessions to get people clean off of methamphetamines, heroin. And with the methamphetamines, from what I'm familiar with, has been without any of the withdrawal symptoms. But I don't know. So I think, to make it clear, like, I know that I speak a lot of nonsense about things that I believe and that I've done. Organic cannabis, mushrooms, ayahuasca, it's grown, it's everywhere, it's easy to identify, would be the best bet to anything synthesized in a lab.
There are certain dietas that, and we don't have time to get into all of that stuff, that aren't psychedelic at all.
Right, we talked about that.
Yeah, so Kirik Sanango, Noya Rao, Bobinsana, all of these are trees in the Amazon, or bushes. They're accessed through the smoking of tobacco, which is labeled mapacho, Nicotina rustica, basically wild tobacco that grows in the fields. Nothing psychedelic about it per se, but it will, just like with the hape ceremony, or the rape as you call it will kick you out of your body on some level for a time, and it will allow you to then transcend. Now, I think it's important to say that things like Stanislav Grof, when things became illegal, he developed holotherapy, I think, which uses shamanic drumming and other things to get you into an altered state without the need for psychedelics, right? So I think it's important to say that on some level that's not absolutely necessary to go into a psychedelic realm to get those benefits. You could get there without psychedelics. I'm not sure how useful it is at the same time, but something to think about.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's breathing techniques, supposedly. I mean,
yoga, what you're doing?
I'm doing yoga, and I hear that all these methods exist for you to be achieve the same level of enlightenment and that sort of thing. And I agree. Enlightenment isn't to be confused with the psychedelic trip. People trip and come back as stupid as they were when they went. It's not an enlightenment tool. It's not. Some people, like you said, take it once. Oh, they got the message. They're good. Some people don't ever need to have that experience. Period. But for me, I don't know. I don't want to say. I guess I do want to say it because I'm struggling not getting it out. But
Sure.
I think I need to say it.
Go ahead.
It's like when people tell me, you don't need that. You can meditate for the next 20 years and get to that state. Okay, sure. Yeah, you want to go to a trip to Cancun? Are you going to go walk it? You're going to get in a plane. Okay. I need to read a book for class. Am I going to read it and not be able to finish my job? Or am I going to find time in the commute to listen to it? Right? It's all tech. We're creatures of technology. There's technology that's existed. There's technology that's being redesigned. Nothing's new under the sun. Everything's repurposed, reused, and evolving into something else. We just forgot how to use that tech. And that is technology, not to become enlightened. It might be a byproduct, but so it is when I eat chips and take a poop. It's a byproduct of an action that had a bunch of more little components to it that we realize. But for me is, you want to be enlightened, you can do it the Brahmin way. No judgment. If you think there's a calling in psychedelics, you need to ask yourself why you think it's a calling. And if you're willing to take that endeavor, just know that what you think you're going to get out of it is entirely different of what it will give you. Like it's honestly, I believe it's the reason why we've created religion. People had these experiences that did such profound changes to our society that they felt it worthy enough to worship.
That is interesting.
But it's tech.
Any final questions for our friend? No? Anything you want to say before that we haven't touched on that you just want to just chat about for a couple of minutes?
Thanks for having me. Thanks for chatting.
Do you want to plug your coffee?
Oh, yes, please. Yeah. Go ahead. Please.
All right, I guess we could. Yeah. So Orbital Decaf. It's a new brand that launched in February for the caffeine sensitive. The idea is to kind of elevate the experience of decaf. Most decafs are the low grade beans that are just sitting stale because the person who asks for it is just needs something that's similar to the taste and not necessarily quality, so it's masks with chemicals and then you add sugars and milks, and the idea is to have something chemical free that's elevated, so it's a specialty grade beans that's graded by the Specialty Coffee Association, decaffeinated by water or sugar cane, and it's natural processed coffee, which gives different flavors, flavor notes, and flavor profiles. But since we mentioned the coffee, everybody is already having an ayahuasca-ish experience. Coffee, the Rubacea caffea plant, gave birth to 2 other plants. One being the Arabica that we all drink, and the other one is the Psychotria viridis, which is the DMT component in the ayahuasca drink.
Wow.
It's the same lineage of the same shrubs of plants, except one decided to give more fruit of a psychoactive substance known as caffeine, and the other one decided to produce more leaves than fruit, and those are the leaves used for the ayahuasca.
Wow.
So you brought coffee. I mentioned that. You guys are going to be judging me for drinking my brews. Everybody's already tripping on coffee.
Nobody's judging. At least they shouldn't be, because this is about discovery and understanding and growing. So,
And there you have it.
And there you have it. So, thank you, brother. Thank you really for being here. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with the listeners and the folks. And yeah.
We are the Brothers of the Arcana.
Yes, we are. I am Alex Aldea.
Dave Ferrigno, thank you for joining us with episode 2.
Absolutely. Thank you again.
Right on. Cool.
Appreciate it.